Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to the amendments in my name and those of the Honourable Member for Vauxhall, which arise from the legislative scrutiny of the bill by the Joint Committee on Human Rights. Those are amendments 28 to 31, 33, 34 to 36, 37 to 40, 41 to 49, and also 12 to 15, which appear first in the name of my honourable friend, the Member for Glasgow North East, and amendments 1 and 2. I remind honourable members that the Joint Committee is a cross-party committee with half its members from the House of Commons and half from the House of Lords, and we undertake legislative scrutiny of all bills for their human rights implications. And I'm speaking in capacity as the chair of the committee today, rather than in my personal capacity, although I would say I have some great sympathy for new Clause 11. Of course, similar measures are being taken in the Scottish jurisdiction, but as my committee didn't have the chance to consider that, I won't be speaking about that, about that amendment. The Public Order Bill contains further significant changes to the law on public order in England and Wales, following on from those introduced in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act. Obviously, from my accent, I'm a Scottish MP, but despite the fact this law only applies in England and Wales, it is of interest to a lot of Scots because a lot of Scots come to London to protest. I see the Minister laughing, but it's truth, and many of us have been doing it for years, even before we got elected to this House.
Member give way on that?
Yeah, well, of course. Oh.
I welcome it. I was a firm believer that we're stronger together, a firm believer in the Union. I'm always welcome to hear the views of Scots people in London, and indeed English people who wish to protest in Edinburgh.
I suspect you'll still hear our views after we become independent, so I wouldn't get too upset about that. Now, during the passage of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, the committee looked very carefully at a large volume of responses and heard from two panels of witnesses around the issue of the public order provisions. And while the Minister said that the stated... Well, I'll just finish my point, if I may. While the Minister said that the stated intention behind this bill is to strengthen police powers to tackle dangerous and highly disruptive protest, we think the measures go beyond this to the extent that we believe the measures in this bill pose an unacceptable threat to the fundamental right to engage in peaceful protest. And that was the conclusion of our report dated 17th June, in which we proposed the amendments that I'm speaking to today, and I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I appreciate her doing so. I just wanted to reflect on the point here that it's not just about our constituents in Scotland being concerned about the provision of this bill, but one of the fundamental parts of policing in the UK is mutual aid, and so there will be considerations for Police Scotland in relation to this bill if it's passed, when we have police officers from Scotland attending protests in other parts of the UK.
Yes, that's a very good point. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making it. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to say this. It's a matter of regret that when the Government responded to our cross-party report, they said the following. They said, any chilling effect on the right to protest, damage to the UK's reputation or encouragement of other nations seeking to crack down on peaceful protest is more likely to arise from misleading commentary on the bill and the Police Act than anything else. No, Minister, that is not the case. The committee's conclusions are not misleading commentary. They're the conclusions of a cross-party committee of this House, informed by evidence from many different sources and advice from our own legal experts on the European Convention of Human Rights, which, thank God, the United Kingdom is still a signatory to and is still enforceable under the Human Rights Act, which seems, thankfully, safe for the time being. And the other point I want to make before I come on to the amendments just quickly is this. The criminal law and the powers of the police already allow for action to be taken against violent protest and disruptive non-violent protest. And that's addressed in detail in paragraph 18 of our report, where we list all the existing provisions under the criminal law of England and Wales which cover the situations about which the Minister says he is concerned. So not only do we think that this bill is an attack on the fundamental rights of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, we also believe that it is unnecessary and it's simply replicating existing law. Now, our first tranche of amendments deal with the new offences set out in clauses 1 and 2. That's proposed offences of locking on and being equipped to lock on. And the purpose, by amendment paper, Madam Deputy Speaker, The purpose of these amendments is to try and water down what we consider to be far too stringent positions, and we're particularly concerned about the reversal of the burden of proof, putting it on the accused. So the purpose of our amendments would be to reverse that back and put it on the prosecution, as is consistent with the presumption of innocence, and also therefore consistent with Article 6 of the ECHR. So that's the purpose of Amendments 28 to 33. They would narrow the scope of clauses 1 and 2 and improve safeguards against violations of convention rights. Now, the offence of obstructing major transport works in Clause 6 is also, we believe, so widely drafted that it could easily criminalise the peaceful exercise of rights under Article 10 and 11. So our amendments 34 to 36 would narrow its scope, including by introducing a requirement of intent and removing the unnecessary reversal of the burden of proof. Moving on to the proposed offence of interfering with key national infrastructure, we think that's too widely drawn and thus risks criminalising without justification behaviour that would fall within the provisions of Article 10 and Article 11 ECHR. So our amendments 37 to 49 would narrow its scope and remove the unnecessary reversal of the burden of proof. Now, coming on to the stop and search powers, we think the proposal to extend stop and search powers to cover searches for articles connected with protest-related offences risks exposing peaceful protesters and other members of the public to intrusive encounters with the police without sufficient justification. We'd really like to see the utilisation of these new powers carefully monitored, and in that respect, I note with approval the terms of new clauses 9 and 10 in the name of the Honourable Member for Battersea. But the most concerning part of this bill really is the power to stop and search without reasonable suspicion. That's a highly exceptional power and will inevitably give rise to the risk of arbitrary or discriminatory use. Such powers have only previously ever been authorised in respect of serious violence and terrorism, and their introduction in response to problems caused by disruptive protest, the committee believes, would be disproportionate and inconsistent with the right to engage in peaceful protest. And that's why we tabled amendments 12 to 15, which are actually supported by other members present today and actually have quite a significant measure of cross-party support beyond just the Joint Committee. And finally, on the serious disruption prevention orders, we'd also like to see them taken out of the bill completely, like the power to stop and search without reasonable suspicion. We believe that they also would result in interference with the legitimate peaceful exercise of the right to freedom of speech and the right to freedom of assembly, and therefore we are supporting amendments 1 and 2. And I just want to say, finally, that we've heard a lot from the current government about the importance of freedom of speech. That's what this bill is about. This is about freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And sometimes when people exercise their right of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, it can be a bit annoying to the rest of us. It can be a bit disruptive. I've been involved in demonstrations, not as a demonstrator, but as somebody trying to get somewhere, which I found annoying and disruptive. But to quote Salman Rushdie, what is freedom of expression? Without the freedom to offend, it ceases to exist. Thank you, Madam